let us look at one of the most popular ways of reasoning in the context of AI systems, namely deductive reasoning. So, when you say deductive reasoning, the basic idea is that you use some background underlying principle of logic to be able to derive new facts of knowledge from existing set of knowledge. So, in context of deductive reasoning, it is governed by what is the underlying logic formalism we're trying to adopt. The basic formulation of logic which is a starting point is what is known as propositional logic. Propositional logic is, to me, a very simple form of logic which is much like the Boolean algebra or hardware circuits. The basic idea is you have notions of variables which represent facts. Then you have standard rules which say that if some pattern of input facts are obtained, then we can derive new facts. For example, if we have a rule which says that Q implies R, and we also know that Q is true, then a rule can imply something like this. So this is what is known as a rule of inference in propositional logic. You have basic facts and you have basic patterns which are true, then you can derive a new fact of logic. For example, if Q implies R is a fact, Q is a fact, both are true, then we say that this rule of inference says you automatically infer that R is true. So take an example, we say that every day, if it's a day, we say that R means sun rises in the east. Today is another day, right? So we'll say that sun will rise in the east today. So the idea is we're talking about combining two different facts but in a specified format, giving rise to new format and a new fact. Same thing, let us take, suppose we know that there is a fact, not of that is not true. Then we can infer that the particular fact is true. This is known as the law of double negation. So this is one basic law of inference which is useful in the context of propositional logic. So we have several such collection of rules which form the basis of how you can infer new facts given existing set of facts, and then how you can apply the rules of inference for basic set of facts. So in deductive reasoning, we actually try to fit an existing set of facts or a rule in any of these rules of inference and try to see if you can derive a new fact and thereby new form of knowledge is created. So if you see, propositional logic is a very simple way of capturing universe of facts and rules of inference. Whereas on the other hand, if you want to do it a bit more generic and not restrict to simple statements. For example, if I say I want to reflect something like which is a property of a class of human beings or for a class of birds. So for example, I will say I should be able to write something like all categories of things which fly, I should be able to write a property like flies of eggs. This gives rise to a new kind of logic known as first order logic. First order logic is basically an extension of the basic propositional logic which allows us to capture generic rules for whole category or whole collection of things of similar type. So in first order logic, just like what we have here in the form of generic rules of inference and facts and rules, we have the generalization of the basic notion by using what is known as variables, which represent whole class of things like individuals, human beings, birds, etc. Then you have something known as predicates, which are very similar to what we call as verbs or properties. And we have expressions like this, which says that all individuals which fly can be represented by fly statement. Then we have also what is known as statements, which are combinations of these. The statements can be an and or an or a not of an existing statement. For example, we can say that something is flying and it is also saying that it is a bird, a T, which is flying as well as it's a bird. So what happens is you are able to represent general classes like species, animals, plants, things and properties about them. You make truths or statements about them in such kind of a logic. So in that sense, it's a quite generalization of the propositional logic. So in context of first order logic, let us see how a rule of inference would look like. For a rule of inference, we need to have two basic qualifiers. One we call it as for all, and then another one we call as there exists. So when you say for all, we basically represent universal truths in form of, or universal facts in the form of for all. Means if you say for all variables, let's say we say that for all x, bird x implies flies x. Means anything which satisfies the property bird, it also satisfies the property it flies. So what it means is it is applicable to every individual which satisfies this property, this corresponding property is satisfied. But now it says that it is applicable for the entire class of things which satisfy bird. But suppose you want to say there is some bird which does not fly. In that sense, we use a concept called there exists. There exists is basically an existential form of indication that we are not applying the property to entire class of bird, but instead we are applying it to only one there exists, such that it's bird and it does not fly. So you see that truths in context of first order logic can be of two types, either it can be universal or it can be existential. Now let us look at what a typical rule of inference in context of first order logic would look like. For example, suppose we have for x, bird x implies phi x is a universal rule, and then you say that bird of some specific instance of x, say bird of crow. Then from using the rule of inference which is known as modus ponens, what we are able to do is by combination of this we created equivalent of modus ponens in the context of first order logic. So we have a rule here where it says that for all x bird implies fly, but there is a bird, then it will also mean that it is flying. So the point is we try to generalize the notion of basic propositional logic to a more generic first order logic. And if you see, human beings' reasoning is very close to first order logic, where we try to make generic assumptions about categories of species or human beings or birds or different living things or non-living things, identify their properties and form such general rules. So what deductive reasoning by use of either propositional logic or first order logic is able to give us is a very powerful way of creating new knowledge from very small pieces of knowledge which are existing in form of generic rules and rules of inference combined together are able to give us a powerful phenomenon for deriving large number of new information. So if you see, the heart of AI programs is deductive reasoning, which is able to derive new facts given a whole bunch of old facts and a whole bunch of rules of inference.